They never remembered her name, but she remembered every whisper behind those velvet walls. And one day, every secret would cost them. Her name was Livia, though in the grand halls of the Verandale estate, she was rarely addressed at all. Just girl, or worse, a flick of the wrist, a sigh heavy with dismissal. Her days passed like the slow sweep of dust across polished marble, unnoticed, unwanted, yet always there. She had come to the house when she was barely 16, a quiet thing, from the rural edges of the continent, with dirt beneath her fingernails and a silence that unsettled people. Not out of rudeness, but out of fear that speaking would only invite more cruelty. In the Verandale manor, silence was not only survival, it was her weapon. The family, wealthy, adorned in gold and scandal, had taken her in not out of generosity, but necessity. They needed someone to clean the messes no one else would touch, someone to keep her head bowed and her tongue still. Livia did exactly that, but she listened, and in that listening, she collected truths like precious stones hidden in the dirt. The mistress, always poised at charity galas, had a lover half her age whom she paid in diamonds. The eldest son, heir to the empire, whispered threats to his siblings when the wine ran out. And the patriarch, the cold-eyed Lord Verandale, kept a set of journals hidden in a locked drawer labeled company records. Though the contents were anything but financial, Livia never wrote things down. She didn't have to. She had a memory sharpened by necessity, polished by pain. At night, she lay on her narrow cot beneath the servants' staircase, the scent of lavender soap lingering in her sleeves. She would replay the day in her mind, every word, every look, every locked door. She didn't cry. She learned quickly that tears made no sound, but cost too much. The other staff didn't talk to her much. Some pitied her, some feared her. Most forgot she was even there. But one night, the butler, Mr. Green, old and loyal to the family in the way that often meant blindness, found her in the kitchen staring out the window. "You know too much for someone so young," he said. Livia didn't look at him. "Be careful. Truth gets girls like you burned." She nodded, but only to make him go away. Because it wasn't the truth that would burn her. It was the lie they would tell to silence her. That lie came one winter night. A missing bracelet. A guest furious. A search of every room. And there, planted beneath her cot, wrapped in silk she would never afford, was Lady Verandale's sapphire heirloom. They didn't ask questions. They didn't let her speak. She was dragged to the estate gates by guards who had never once remembered her face, and tossed into the snow like trash. Her final memory of that place wasn't the grandeur or the betrayal. It was the way the lights inside flickered, like the house itself was laughing. But Livia didn't die that night. They thought they buried a maid. What they created was a reckoning, and one day, she would walk back through those gilded doors, not to clean their messes, but to expose them, one secret at a time. They hid their sins behind silk curtains and chandeliers. But even silk can't muffle a voice that remembers. And Livia remembered everything. The manor had many rooms, but only one truth. It was layered behind velvet drapes, muffled by laughter that reeked of champagne and desperation. Livia had once believed the house had a soul, one made of dark mahogany and guilt. Now, she knew it had a pulse, a steady, thudding beat that only she could hear. And with every passing day, it beat louder. It began the night she was made to polish the mirrors in the East Wing, a room the staff rarely entered unless under orders. The Verandales entertained their most powerful guests there, bankers with silver cufflinks, politicians with trembling smiles, and once, a woman who wore diamonds like armor. As she moved silently from frame to frame, Livia caught sight of Lord Verandale speaking to a man in a plum velvet coat. Their voices were low, their backs turned. "She knows too much already," the man murmured. Lord Verandale replied with a calm so sharp it could sever flesh. "Then we ensure she forgets, one way or another." Livia froze, not out of fear, but calculation. They weren't speaking of her. They were speaking of Isolde, the Verandale's ward. Isolde had been taken in 5 years prior, a fragile creature with pale skin and quiet eyes. Rumor whispered that she was a distant cousin. Others said she was the result of a family scandal long buried. Livia had seen the bruises, not on her skin, on her spirit, and now she knew. Isolde had seen something, maybe said something, and the family planned to make her forget. Livia moved carefully from the room, her steps softer than breath. She wouldn't warn Isolde, not yet. That would put them both in danger. She needed more more proof, more secrets. So she began to listen. Late at night, when the house grew silent, she would move like a shadow past the guest rooms and into the narrow passageways behind the walls, ancient service corridors built for servants who were meant to be invisible. There, she heard it all. The mistress sobbing into her vanity mirror, whispering, "He knows, oh God, he knows." The second son arguing with his father about offshore accounts. The daughter, Serafini, swearing she would never marry the Viscount, no matter what price had been promised. Livia didn't write any of it down. She etched it in her mind, a tapestry of shame threaded by wealth, every scandal, every betrayal, every forbidden truth. She became the keeper of sins they didn't know were being watched. One day, while cleaning the conservatory, she found a letter tucked beneath a cracked floor tile. The handwriting was uneven, frantic. "If anything happens to me, find the ledger hidden behind the West Wing fireplace. It's the only proof." Signed I. Via Sol de Verendale. Her blood turned cold. It wasn't a warning. It was a farewell. That night, Isolde vanished. The family claimed she had gone to study abroad, but no luggage was taken. No carriage came. Just a silence so deep it rang in Livia's ears like a scream. They had made her disappear, just like they tried to do to Livia later. But Livia wasn't gone. She was watching, and now she knew exactly where to begin. They needed a scapegoat. They chose the quiet one. But fire doesn't silence a girl who's already burned. The snow hadn't yet melted when the rumor bloomed like rot through the hallways. Something was missing, something important, and someone among the staff had taken it. It was a gold bracelet. They said, not just any Lady Verendale's sapphire heirloom, passed down through generations of women who had worn it like a crown of ice. And now it was gone. Gone from the velvet box in her dressing table, gone from the watchful eyes of her maid, gone as if swallowed by the walls themselves. Suspicion, of course, never touched the family. It was the help who bore the burden of guilt. Whether proven or not, Livia had felt it before anyone said a word, a shift in glances, in the coldness of the air when she entered a room. The staff grew distant. Whispers followed her footsteps like smoke trailing a match. Even Mr. Green, whose face had always been blank as stone, avoided her gaze. 3 days passed before they came for her. 2 guards, 1 accusation, 0 chances to speak. They dragged her from her quarters, her belongings overturned, her name smeared on silver platters and linen sheets. "We found it," Lady Verendale hissed. Her voice was sharp, delighted, theatrical. She held the bracelet aloft like a holy relic. Under her cot, Livia said nothing. Her eyes did not widen. Her lips did not tremble. Because she knew this moment. She had seen it in Isolde's eyes, the day before she vanished. They didn't call the police. They didn't need to dot in places like Verendale Manor. Justice wore lace gloves and pearls. Punishment came in shame and silence. They pushed her out the front gates in the dead of night, into the cold, into the dark, into nothing. And no coat, no apology, no explanation. The snow came down in thick, soundless sheets, and Livia walked. She didn't cry. She counted steps. She repeated names. She burned every face into her memory like etchings on stone. Because they hadn't discarded a servant, they had ignited a reckoning. And fire, when fed by injustice, doesn't die. It grows. She found shelter in a place they never would have searched. The attic of the old greenhouse on the far edge of the estate's lands. A place once used to cultivate exotic orchids, now wilted and forgotten. There, she wrote everything, every secret, every betrayal, every whisper. The mistress's debts, the son's blackmail schemes, the daughter's affair, the patriarch's journals. She wrote with shaking hands, with frostbitten fingers, with a rage too old for her years, and when her writing was done, she slept with the pages tucked beneath her chest like armor, not to protect her, but to protect the story, because one day, she would return, not as a maid, but as a storm. They thought she had vanished into the snow, but ghosts don't disappear. They haunt and they return. 2 years passed. The world beyond Verendale's gates was colder, harsher, but strangely quieter. No eyes on her, no whispered orders, no velvet lies stitched into everyday life. Livia lived under a different name now, Clara Dupont, a name borrowed from a gravestone no one visited. She had found it during her months in hiding, wandering between ruined chapels and forgotten villages. Clara had died at 14. Livia gave her life again. She worked in kitchens and laundries, picking up languages, accents, movements. She studied how people listened. More importantly, she studied how they didn't. when she saved enough, she enrolled in a small etiquette school under a sponsor's name she forged herself. There, she learned to walk in heels like she'd worn them all her life, sip wine without blinking, and lie with a smile that felt like silk across her teeth. She transformed slowly, meticulously, piece by piece, not into someone else, but into the version of herself the Varendales never imagined she could be. By the time she returned to the capital, she was no longer Livia the servant, she was Clara Dupont, the poised, enigmatic niece of a fictitious French noble who had tragically passed. Her story was watertight, her background vague enough to intrigue, polished enough to disarm. She wore black velvet gloves and never removed them. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people leaned in. She began attending salons, charity balls, and political dinners, always as a guest of someone who wanted to be seen with her. She didn't need to seek out the Varendales, they found her. "Miss Dupont," said Serafini Varendale at the Winter Foundation Gala. Her smile was syrup, her eyes were knives. "I don't believe we've met." Livia turned slowly, lifting her glass, not formally. The daughter of the house didn't recognize her. That was the moment Livia knew she had succeeded. She had built an illusion so precise, so complete, that even the woman who once screamed orders at her across the parlor now extended her hand like she was royalty, and Livia took it, not out of respect, but to begin the slow, deliberate pull of the news. By the end of the night, she had received an invitation, dinner at Varendale Manor, just the inner circle, a chance to discuss philanthropy, Serafini had said, but Livia saw it for what it was, an opening. She accepted with a smile, and, as she turned away, the lights of the gala glinting off her wine glass like shards of a shattered mirror, she whispered the words only she could hear. "I'm coming home. You can't destroy a house from the outside. You have to dine with the architects first. Then, pull the foundation from beneath their feet." The invitation arrived in the form of a hand-delivered envelope, cream parchment, gilded edges, the Varendale seal pressed deep into the wax like a wound that never closed. It smelled faintly of rose oil and old money. Inside, a formal request to attend an intimate dinner hosted by Lord and Lady Varendale for select patrons of the Winter Foundation. Clara Dupont and Olivia read it only once. Then she folded it neatly and tucked it into her leather clutch, right next to a tiny vial of lavender perfume and the small silver locket she never opened. That night, she dressed in navy silk. Not black. Black was mourning, vengeance, shadow. Navy was elegance, power wrapped in restraint. Her earrings shimmered with quiet authority. Her shoes made no sound. Her gloves, still velvet, still dark, hid the past in plain sight. She arrived at Varendale Manor just before 8. The gates opened for her like jaws remembering their prey. The entrance hall had not changed. The same chandelier, dripping with crystal like tears never wept. The same marble floors, cold and echoing, as if no step there was truly heard. But this time her steps echoed. A servant opened the door and bowed deeply, not realizing the irony. Livia offered a polite nod, her smile gracious but unreadable. Inside, the family waited. Lady Varendale greeted her first, air-kissing each cheek with precision. Her makeup was perfect, her eyes calculating. Lord Varendale stood farther back, a glass of brandy in hand, his gaze sweeping her like he was appraising a sculpture he didn't remember commissioning. And Serafini, the one who had invited her, smiled like they'd been old schoolmates. "Clara, you look divine. Come, let me introduce you to the others." Others, of course. This wasn't just dinner. It was a stage. Around the long mahogany table sat the usual suspects, a minor viscount with a thinning hairline and ego to match, a duchess, famed more for scandal than nobility, two financiers with eyes that flicked to every jewel in the room. And now, Clara Dupont. They dined on pheasant and saffron, drank wine older than some of the guests' marriages. Conversation turned to charities, global affairs, and the price of art. Never truth, never scandal. Not at this table. But Livia was listening, always listening. Every strained chuckle from Lord Varendale, every deflection from Serafini when the topic of their former ward arose, every time Lady Varendale squeezed her napkin too tightly. This house bled secrets. They just didn't know she held the knife now. After dessert, she excused herself and wandered. No one stopped her. They thought she was one of them. She drifted toward the West Wing, past portraits of stern-faced ancestors, past a hallway that had once echoed with her silent steps when she carried linens instead of wine. She paused outside the study, locked. As expected, but the fire had been lit inside. Someone had been there. Someone still used the room where Isolde once read late into the night. She placed her gloved hand on the door, not to open it but to remember. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about the truth they buried inside these walls, and now, she had a seat at their table. Soon, she would own the house. Some doors are locked for a reason, not to keep others out but to keep truths from escaping. And she was ready to break the silence. The fire in the study had long gone out, but the scent of smoke lingered faint but unmistakable, like an afterthought too stubborn to vanish. Livia stood outside that heavy oak door, heart steady, fingers twitching inside her gloves. She knew what lay beyond it: ledgers, letters, secrets. A past wrapped in mahogany and guilt. That room had once been forbidden to her, but she had cleaned it in silence, swept its corners with unseen eyes, memorized every loose panel and crooked painting. She hadn't been permitted to speak then. Now, she didn't need permission. That night, long after the dinner party guests had stumbled into carriages and brandy dreams, she returned. A single hairpin was all it took. The lock clicked open with a sound softer than breath. The study welcomed her like an old adversary. Heavy books lined the walls, histories written by men who erased others, financial ledgers too neat to be honest. A fire had been lit and hastily put out. The poker lay skewed across the hearth, still warm. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. It was as if time had paused here. A globe still spun slowly from someone's earlier touch. A decanter of sherry sat half full on the desk, the glass beside it stained with a familiar shade of lipstick. Lady Verandale, she was here earlier. Why? Livia began searching, not like a thief but like an archivist. She knew exactly what she was looking for: a small creak in the floorboard by the second bookshelf, a hollow knock beneath the window seat. She followed memory like a map, and there, behind a false back in the lowest shelf, she found it: a box. Black leather, unmarked. She opened it slowly. Inside, letters, faded and furious. A ledger filled with dates and transactions, none of which matched the family's official accounts. But at the very bottom, beneath layers of falsified reports and redacted memos, was something else. A photograph: Isolde, smiling, young, standing beside Lady Verandale, but not as a servant, not as a guest, as a daughter. The resemblance was undeniable. The eyes, the cheekbones. Isolde hadn't been a ward, she had been blood. Livia sank into the old leather chair behind the desk, the photograph trembling in her hands. Everything made sense now: the control, the cruelty, the sudden disappearance. They hadn't buried a scandal, they had buried a daughter. And now, Livia held the match. The fire would come, not out of hatred, but out of justice. He thought meeting her would give him answers, but the woman who returned wasn't seeking closure. She was offering him a seat at the reckoning. The cafe was intentionally unremarkable, quiet, tucked between a flower shop and an antique bookstore, with windows fogged by steam and winter breath. Adrian arrived early, uncharacteristically so, dressed down in a dark coat and gloves that still bore the scent of leather and anise. He hadn't slept much. Not since her face returned to him in dreams, not Evelyn, but her, the girl whose name he couldn't say aloud without tasting guilt. He sat by the window, ordered nothing, and waited. When she arrived, the door didn't chime. She moved like the wind had made room for her, Evelyn Marlowe. But he knew better now. He stood halfway before remembering that he didn't know whether to shake her hand or apologize. She sat down before he could decide. Adrian, she said. He nodded, swallowing the lump forming like a verdict in his throat. You changed your name, he said finally. I changed everything, she replied, folding her gloves into her lap. That's what survival looks like when the world teaches you your existence was a mistake. There was no anger in her voice. That unnerved him more than fury would have. I didn't know, he started, but her raised brow stopped him cold. No, she said. You didn't care to know. He glanced away. I came here because I want to understand, fix this. If I can. Evelyn tilted her head. This isn't a redemption arc, Adrian. I'm not a ghost waiting to be blessed into peace. Her words struck deeper than volume ever could. He sat back, defenseless. Then why agree to meet? She smiled, just barely. Because I wanted to see what guilt looks like in daylight. They spoke little after that. She sipped her coffee. He nursed his shame. When she finally stood, he rose too, as if etiquette could redeem what neglect had built. Thank you, he said, unsure why. She paused by the door. "There's one thing I want you to remember," she said without turning. "You didn't just break a girl. You built a woman who doesn't need your apology." And with that, she was gone. Back at Whitestone Tower, Adrian stood before the board hours later, papers in hand, markets to stabilize. But her voice still echoed, and he knew he had not reached the end of her story. He had stumbled into its beginning. She had once begged to be heard. Now, the world leaned in to listen, and every truth she spoke came wrapped in consequence. The article dropped on a Thursday.no announcement. No teaser, just a sudden ripple across the internet, an expose published by a respected journalist, detailing a string of unethical acquisitions made under Whitestone Holdings during Adrian's tenure. The documents were anonymous, but the timing was surgical. Evelyn stood by the large glass windows of her penthouse, the city humming below like a live wire beneath her heels. Her assistant's voice echoed through the speakerphone. 3 board members have called emergency meetings. Investors are spooked. And Adrian just canceled his keynote. Evelyn didn't blink. Good, let them sweat. She had spent years learning the language of silence, how it concealed, how it protected. But now she was fluent in exposure. Adrian stormed through the corridors of Whitestone Tower, a copy of the article clutched in his fist. It wasn't just damaging, it was precise, personal. It struck at weak spots only someone on the inside could have known, and he knew exactly who that someone was. But he had no proof. Worse, he had no defense. When he reached his office, another envelope was waiting. This time, not anonymous. A single sentence written in ink the color of vengeance. Silence was your weapon. Now, it's mine. No name. No signature. But he recognized the handwriting. Across town, Evelyn walked through the gallery where her latest line was being showcased, garments stitched with the motif of broken chains and phoenix feathers. Each piece told a story. Not of pain, but of survival. She greeted guests, spoke with grace, but behind every smile was a memory, behind every toast a strategy. The world thought she had forgiven, but she had simply outgrown the need for revenge. Now, she didn't want him ruined, she wanted him irrelevant. That evening, headlines exploded with speculation. Who is M Studios' enigmatic founder really? Paparazzi staked out the corners of Evelyn's life, searching for cracks in her composure. But they found none, because she wasn't hiding anymore. She was rewriting everything. Power doesn't shatter in a storm. It crumbles in silence, when no one is watching. And when it falls, the throne cuts deepest. The boardroom of Whitestone Holdings had never felt smaller. The polished walnut table, once a monument to Adrian's authority, now felt like a courtroom bench. On the far end, the board chair cleared his throat. But it was the silence that followed that echoed loudest. Adrian stood at the head, notes in front of him, a tailored suit doing little to hide the pallor of his skin. "We're in control," he said. "The article is speculative. We've already prepared legal rebuttals." But the eyes staring back weren't convinced. Not anymore, because something had shifted, not just in the press or the stocks but in their belief in him. He saw it in the way Margaret Lang, his longest-standing ally, avoided his gaze. In how the CFO's hand hovered too long over the budget review, like he was afraid to touch anything that might be poisoned. Whitestone Holdings was not bleeding yet, but it was trembling. And kings do not get to tremble. That night, Evelyn received a text message. "You've made your point. I want to meet one last time." She didn't reply. Instead, she stared out at the skyline, his skyline, and whispered to herself, "You're not the point anymore." But she agreed, not out of nostalgia, out of strategy. They met in the place it all began, Whitestone's original atelier, now abandoned, its mannequins still draped in designs she had once sketched in stolen moments. He was already there, waiting. "You've won," he said. "Is that what you needed to hear?" Evelyn stepped closer, her heels sharp against the concrete. "I didn't come to hear anything, Adrian. I came to finish writing the end." He looked up. The confidence was gone now, but not the arrogance. That never died easily. "I built this empire," he said. "No," she corrected. "You inherited it, and you poisoned it, and now the world's watching you lose it." His jaw clenched. "Why are you doing this?" She leaned in, voice barely a whisper. "Because I was never trash, and you were never a king. You were just a man with a crown borrowed from silence." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "If you're smart, you'll step down quietly. Let Whitestone fall into steadier hands, or stay and watch it burn." The next morning, Headlines read, Adrian Whitestone resigns amid scandal, and beside it, M Studio to launch foundation for young creators led by Evelyn Marlowe. The city knew her name now, but more importantly so did the girl she used to be. They said she was nothing but a name attached to a scandal. They called her broken, discarded, irrelevant. But queens do not ask to rule, they rise when no one believes they will. The marble foyer of the grand hall gleamed under the soft weight of golden chandeliers. Every seat was filled, every camera pointed toward the stage, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She had worn armor for years, it simply now took the shape of silk and steel spin posture. The charity gala she founded, Voices in Silence, had drawn Europe's most powerful figures, philanthropists, fashion moguls, and political elites. But the brightest light in the room did not come from a spotlight. It came from the woman who once cried behind bathroom stalls at board meetings. Tonight, she stood not as a survivor, but as a sovereign. She took the stage to thunderous applause. Though she raised her hand gently to quiet it, I used to believe that silence was strength, she began, her voice calm but resounding, that the less I said, the more I could endure, that by shrinking myself, I could stay safe. A pause, breath, fire and restraint. But the truth is silence can be a cage, and mine nearly became a coffin. She looked out at them not with pride, not with vengeance but with clarity. I was called a shadow, a wife, a mistake, a whisper in someone else's legacy. Her voice didn't waver. I am now the architect of my own. The applause returned deeper this time, not just loud, but earned. Adrian watched from a private lounge above the mezzanine, his glass untouched, his breath shallow. He had seen her rise before, but this was something different. This was her throne, rebuilt from ashes he once scattered, and there was no room for him beside it. After the gala, Evelyn walked alone through the gardens, not to escape, but to breathe, to remind herself that she didn't need walls anymore. A young designer approached her, nervous, barely 20. You changed everything for us, she said. For women like me. Evelyn smiled, placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. No, she whispered, I just reminded the world that we were always here. Later, in her atelier, she hung the final framed photo, a candid shot from tonight, her standing under the gala lights, not smiling, glowing. She didn't look like the woman she once was. She looked like the empire they never saw coming.